And he wrote that in the book of Proverbs. So I'm really pushing, I mean, you know, like talk about an uphill battle.
I've been watching Jeopardy. And some of the answers the teachers are giving on that stuff, teachers, people who are teachers are giving, they're not teaching history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
3 of them on the same show didn't know who Hitler was.
Wow, my goodness.
I remember Hitler.
oh, anyways. Well, that's remarkable in a bad way. Okay. Let's get our bearings here. We're in the Mediterranean Sea. The Roman Empire, by the way, literally circumvents the Mediterranean. They're in North Africa, they're in Egypt, they control all of this. And these are actually, this map is Paul's first 3 missionary journeys, but I just did it because it had the places I wanted you to see here. The church is born in Jerusalem here. And then we saw the Gentile church begin with Cornelius. In what city was Cornelius located when Peter went to him to preach? Anybody remember? It's on your map.
They went to Caesarea.
Yeah. Now, we're going to look at that today because it was a major seaport built by Herod the Great. In your notes, if you would write down, there was a whole list of Herods that ruled. But the one called Herod the Great he is the one who had the children in Bethlehem put to death because he was afraid that Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem, which he was. But we're going to look at Herod the Great. But Caesarea, there's no natural land port or seaport in Israel. There's no seaport. So he had one man-made. And the day before machines, to make a seaport with you know, people's bare hands and manual labor without machines is an incredible feat. So he's called Herod the Great. He should really be called Herod the Terrible. But in this way, he really was great. He was a great builder. He financed huge building projects that actually did affect history. One of them was a seaport in Caesarea. Cornelius is a Roman centurion. He's in charge of 100 soldiers. That was their main station, Caesarea, because they would come in on boats from Rome. Soldiers could come in that way, much easier than making the trip by land. So he literally built Caesarea. We're going to show pictures of the ruins of it. If you go to Israel, they'll take you there. You'll go see them. So, get an idea where these things are. And then the Apostle Paul, his missionary journeys, starts from Antioch, which is in Syria. Interesting. He's Jewish. He goes out with Barnabas, who's Jewish, but they're sent out by a Gentile church in Antioch. So you get an idea where these things are. And the other thing that confuses people, there are 2 Antiochs in the empire. They will visit Antioch at some point during your travels, the missionary version. But you've got this Antioch and this Antioch are not the same city. So just get an idea where things are. Look at that map occasionally so when we talk about these, it makes sense to you. All right. Now, we mentioned that according to Matthew, some's review, some's new today, definitely. And the review is important because I'm going to really hold you. The stuff I taught last week, I want you to know that as facts. I'm going to ask them on every test they give you. So that you actually have key dates and events that happened in the 1st century and know them the rest of your life. The Lord will come before you forget them or get, you know, what's that when you lose your memory? Oh, you should still remember them. We'll get them in your long-term memory, so when your short-term memory goes, you'll still remember them. Okay? You know, you can remember what you did when you were a kid, but you can't remember what you ate for breakfast. You know, when you get like that, we'll still have you. We'll have you in good shape.
What did you just say?
I went to Bernals High School.
Clowning. No, we won't hold that against
I can't remember what I said a minute
We'll
ago.
hold that against
All right, now, let's go on here.
You probably rode my sister's bus.
Let's see. Mark, how about reading the scriptures there for us? Well, now that we're not on mic, I can have anybody read.
This one here?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven.
Now, we went through this last week, and now use your whiteboards. We're going to use your memory here a little bit. Your, I don't know, midterm memory here, last week. Okay. Peter is supposed to have the keys of the kingdom. Meaning through Peter somehow the gospel is supposed to be opened up and given to people. Peter preaches the day the church is born. What was that day? Write on your whiteboards, hold them up. Lighting helps you, even if you're not, I don't want to hold them up, it helps you write it.
Does spelling count?
Okay, on Pentecost. Now, let's see if you can get advanced here. Don't erase Pentecost. What is the Jewish name for that holiday? Now we're getting into Pentateuch last semester. Okay, Fred's got anybody else? You could use some better markers. Okay. Oh, wrong feast, you got a feast. It is the Feast of Weeks. Because Pentecost was supposed to be after 7 sevens, or after 7 weeks. 7 weeks is 49 days, the day after is the 50th day, that's where we get Pentecost. So it's a Feast of Weeks, okay. So, the church is born on that day through Peter's preaching. It's all Jewish. And of course, the significance is this, Pentecost is a required feast. 3 feast days, all Jewish males, adult males, had to go to Jerusalem to worship. One was Pentecost. So there were not only Jews from all over Israel, there were Jews from all over the world. So on Pentecost, when the tongues of fire come upon their heads and they speak in other languages, they've got people who understand 20 or 30 different tongues. And they're all hearing a Galilean telling them, and somebody, and of the 120 believers, one of them was speaking their language. And so God is, if you will, like wildfire, trying to get his word out. So the first people baptized didn't just come from Israel, it came from all over the empire. And they're going to go back with the what? With the gospel. So this is God's, if you will, lightning approach to getting the gospel out fast, because it's the only name that people can call upon to be saved. So Pentecost is the perfect day for this. Now, secondly, Peter preaches, 3,000 people are baptized, the church is born that day, the day of Pentecost. 50 days after the Feast of First Fruits. All right? And we will go through those other ones in a minute. We're going to use them in today's presentation. Secondly, who was the first Gentile to hear Peter preach and get saved? Him and his whole household. We talked about this. Okay?
I can't spell it.
To give you an idea.
Cornelius,
I can't spell
the
it.
centurion, we just mentioned it, in Caesarea. All right? And the significance of it is a couple of things. We'll go through it in more detail in a few minutes. Is that Peter goes to this Gentile's house, and the minute he's finished with his gospel presentation, that Jesus is Lord, he's been raised from the dead, he doesn't have a chance to give an invitation for salvation. The minute he finishes presenting the gospel, the Holy Spirit falls on them, and they begin to speak in other languages. All right? So it was like a second Pentecost, and now the Gentiles have the gospel. All right? And so Peter now, through his preaching, the Jewish church has been born, and the Gentile church has been born. And that way, that scripture is fulfilled. Okay. Now, I know if you come from a Catholic background, they go wild with this thing. Okay? And, yeah. Some of you know. We won't get into all that tonight. Okay. But in that way, Peter does have the keys of the kingdom. He preaches. The Jewish church is at Pentecost. He preaches at Cornelius' house on the seacoast in Caesarea. That beautiful seacoast city built by who?
Herod the Great.
Herod the great builder, not the great king. Miserable man. We'll get into how miserable he was next, actually. Okay, now, our timeline. Some of this is review. But like I say, I want this in your permanent memory so we do a little review of these things. If I just mention them once, you will be a little difficult. All right. We do not know the exact date of Christ's birth. We do know it was before BC 4, because Herod died in BC 4. That's Herod the Great. And Herod obviously was trying to put to death the baby Jesus, so Jesus had to be born before that. Our best guess is around 6 BC, Jesus was born. And we can only approximate that. When we calculate these things, when Jesus died, one of the things to remember is there is no zero. You go from 1 BC to 1 AD. There is no 0 BC. Doesn't exist, okay? So you skip a year when you do your calculations. All right, so we have Jesus' birth. Now, a little bit about Herod here. We're gonna get into this. Most famous quote about him. Emperor Augustus said of Herod the Great, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son."
Why?
Imagine, most famous thing said about you? Well, why would Augustus say that? Herod was a brilliant politician, and I want to read this, it really explains it. Herod had 2 important attributes: absolute loyalty to Rome and political prowess, which he exercised with extraordinary brutality by extirpating all the signs of opposition, even within his own family. He did not hesitate to execute several of his own sons. Herod had 4 sons. His 2 older sons he executed on suspicion that they were starting a conspiracy against him. Whether that was true or not, we do not know. But he put to death his 2 oldest sons. Then he died, and his 2 youngest sons divided the kingdom. Now, so, this Augustus, he put to death his 2 sons. And the next one here, not only his 2 sons, whom he suspected of plotting against him, as well as his favorite wife, the Hasmonean Miriam. This earned him the saying by Augustus, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son." And actually, history says not only did he execute his favorite wife, that she haunted him. That at night he was heard calling out to her in shrieks and cries. And, when you become a murderer, which in this case he really did, it plays on the mind. It plays on the mind. In a sense, we know that when we murder someone, we deserve to be executed, and then we become paranoid that we're going to get what we deserve. And this seems to be the mental state of Herod the Great. So executing his 2 oldest sons and his wife earned him this kind of a reputation. There is, besides, I think it's Matthew. Matthew and Luke are the 2 who talk about the birth of Christ. I think it's Matthew that talks about the wise men from the east, or the Magi. I think I got that right. There's no other record of that in history. But what kind of man would put to death children 2 years and younger in a small village called Bethlehem? The same guy who would execute his 2 sons and his wife. Lastly, knowing how murderous he was the perfect man to do such a thing. And he was paranoid of someone stealing his power. And when they said, the Messiah is going to be born, the Christ is going to be born in Bethlehem, paranoid Herod goes to work with a plan. And his plan was always murder anybody who might threaten his power. Upon his death, he wanted people to mourn. He realized they would not. So history tells us that he had arrested 300 people, put them in a huge hall in the city, guarded, with orders that at the moment of his death they should all be executed, so that then they would mourn his death. The minute he died, everybody forgot about his plan. They weren't going to do it. They didn't execute anybody. But his character is very well developed in the scriptures. He's predictable what he's going to do. All right? So that gives us a little idea of what kind of man would do such a thing. According to Augustus, he was fully capable of it. This is the only building that he built that is still standing today. There it is. And a little bit about him, because this is what he's really famous for today. I've seen, they did a whole National Geographic on the buildings that he had built, a whole issue of it, because they were incredible. So, incredible building feats, but personal character absolutely lacking. Herodian architecture is a style of classical architecture characteristic of numerous building projects undertaken during his reign, and there's the years of his reign. 37 BC to 4 BC. That's a firm date in history. There's a record of his death. There's a record of the funeral procession when his body was carried from Jerusalem to Caesarea. There's a record of the kingdom being divided between his two sons. So that gives us a, you know, if you will, Herod helps us know that when Jesus was born, it had to be before 4 BC from those historical records. So, what did we say? During his reign, 37 to 4 BC, of Herod the Great, the Roman client king of Judea, Herod undertook many colossal building projects. Most famously, his reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 19 BC. It took over, to finish the temple took more than 60 years, I believe. It may have been 70. But Herod financed the thing, and the Jews liked this. So when Jesus appears in the temple, as he would visit on different, you know, right, the Jewish men 3 times a year had to come to Jerusalem. He would go to the temple and worship. So we know he did this many times. But in the final week of his life, he is in Herod's temple. Now, Herod did not start a new temple. He took Zerubbabel's temple, which was built after the Jews returned to Palestine, and he added to it, embellished it, added additions on it, and so it was known as Herod's temple. Herod the Great builder, not Herod the Great king, though he was both. So he built a tremendous temple. If you visit Israel, the foundation that they built the temple upon is still there, and they have a tunnel underground. We went in that tunnel, and you can see the foundation of this tunnel. There's a stone in that temple mount that would go from this side of the room to that side of the room. One stone. Oh, imagine the poor guys had to move that thing. How many years they spent doing it. He didn't want it going anywhere, I guess. So it's still there. I have a picture of my wife holding it up.
Just a point of interest, you can see the facade of that temple in Orlando.
What now?
You can see the facade of the front face of that temple. As a matter of fact, I've got pictures of it at home.
Well, what you see with the temple is you're seeing the model. There's a place in Jerusalem where there's a model of the whole city, and you walk around it and take pictures. I have pictures of it too myself. I may show some of those.
They have that in Orlando.
I got a picture of it here. I mean, it's famous, but it's usually there's a couple different people who have made models of the temple. There's one right in Jerusalem, so you see what is known as Herod's temple, and we're going to go to that actually. This building encased what was called the Patriarch's Cave, meaning he built a building around a cave that was supposed to, you know, contain the bones of the patriarchs, some of them. Whether that's accurate location or not, but he actually built this building in one of his projects. This is what the temple looked like that Jesus went into. In that temple, the final week of his life, he went in and preached and healed the sick and the lame in the temple. So the children were praising him in the temple place, but they did not recognize their Messiah. Now, the disciples, remember them meeting in Solomon's porch? How many remember that expression from the book of Acts? This is Solomon's porch. One of the things that Herod added onto is these porches, meaning it's hot in Jerusalem much of the year, and you want to be out of the sun, so people who came to pray or to worship could rest underneath those pillars, underneath those porches. It was there in the book of Acts where Peter and John, after they healed a man at the gate called Beautiful, they went up to Solomon's porch and were preaching there. And you can see what a big area it is. So the thousands of people could gather in that huge square and watch this man leaping and praising God, clinging to Peter and John in that location. So it gives us an idea, you know, this is where it happened. This is what it looked like. What I didn't show you here, there's a Roman fort built on the corner of the temple, so that if there was any ruckus in the temple, the soldiers could go running down from the fort and gain control of the situation. By the way, if a Gentile tried to enter that temple, you kill them. No questions asked, no trial, you just, okay? It would cause a riot too. So it's a very interesting arrangement there. One of the things, some of you have heard this story, there's a movie called Masada. Herod built 4 palace fortresses. One in Jerusalem, one in Caesarea, one in Masada, there's one other one that he built. And they were fortresses because he was paranoid. And this is the ultimate fortress because it's on a mountaintop. And after his death, some Jewish zealots occupied it. The Romans finally were ready to take Masada, and they all committed suicide. They could not be captured. There was a famous movie made about it. We actually went to the top of things. Beautiful up there. But they had a whole water system so that they could live indefinitely on top of that mountaintop. The Romans started building a ramp so they could get up to it and get through. It took them a long while to do it, but they did it. And they used Jewish slaves, so if the people in Masada sent back, arrows or bolts or rocks, they were killing fellow Jews. It's nasty, but it went on. That's Masada. And these are actually, when you visit Israel, you visit a lot of Herod stuff. This is Caesarea, where this is a Roman theater that he built there. It's still standing, and they still have productions there sometimes. It's on the coast. He also built there an aqueduct. It's the last thing we saw in Israel when my wife and I visited. And what you don't see is he built this man-made harbor, an earthquake destroyed it before 70 AD. It just leveled the thing. But this is Herod the Great, and he had an effect on the history of Israel. Okay. Now, we're going to go to something a little different here with our dates I did not do before. The actual days, Jesus, the final week of his life, when was he crucified, when was he buried, when was he raised? And I'm going to show you, this is a minority opinion. This is not what you normally hear from the pulpit, but I'm going to show it to you because it's in the Word of God. And it gets in, I'm going to show you the scriptures for it. So we're going to go through this week. And when I was reading this, at first, am I reading heresy or biblical truth? It took me a while to get adjusted to this, but I'm convinced that you're going to see what happened on what days. This is history, and most people today, I believe, have it wrong. And I believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus on the 3rd day, and that we all agree on that. On which day, you're going to look at a different look here. So if you don't like it, that's fine. But I'll show you the case for it, because it's in the scriptures. And I know how you people are. If it's in the Bible, you want to know what it is. So, we're going to start with the events. Tuesday, Nisan 13. Remember that Nisan is the first month in the Jewish religious calendar. When Moses crossed through the Red Sea, God said, we're going to start with a brand new calendar with you. And in that brand new calendar, the first month is Nisan. Okay? So, the 13th, Jesus and the 12 disciples come into Jerusalem from Bethany to partake of a Passover meal. And it's in John and Peter were sent ahead of time to locate a place for the meal to make preparation. Some of you remember that story. It's in Mark 14, 12 through 16. In Mark 14, 17. So, Jesus eats an early Passover meal with his disciples. Now this is, I do have my board here. This is where your brain gets mixed up. Jewish reckoning, or Jewish time. Sunset is the beginning of the next day. So, now does the sun just went down? Just went down. Okay. If we were in Jewish time today, this is Saturday. Saturday starts when the sun goes down on Friday. So, even though this is Tuesday, the Tuesday is the 13th. In the evening of Tuesday starts Wednesday. Does that get your mind a little boggled? Okay, it does, but it is. So, Tuesday, let's see, so let me go through this here. Okay, the early Passover meal would be what we would call Tuesday night. But to the Jews, Tuesday night is Wednesday, the beginning of Wednesday. So because it's Wednesday, it is the day of the Passover. It's early Passover. That's not the normal time to have the Passover meal. Why would he have an early Passover? Because at the time of the actual Passover, he's supposed to be the Passover lamb and be dying for our sins. He can't be feasting and dying on the cross at the same time. But God in his economy figured a way to get him to have the meal on the Passover and still have time to be the Passover lamb. Okay? You can't do both at once. All right? So Tuesday evening they have a meal. And we're going to call it, I've looked at a number of Jewish sources on this, it's really a modified Passover. It's not quite like the traditional one. And we're going to see what he changed about it a little bit anyways. All right? So, now let's see. Passover observed on the 14th of Nisan every year. If you look in Leviticus 23, there's a list of the feasts of the Lord. They're listed, boom, 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 one after another. And so it's listed there. That's where it is. You can look at all the others are there too. Leviticus 23:5, Jesus and disciples partook of the Passover in the early evening of the previous day. But the early evening of the previous day in Jewish thinking is not the previous day. It is the day. All right. You're still with me. Most of you are like, okay, I think you get this. And by the way, I get confused by this too. I had to read this several times before it started getting into my head. I think some of you will pick it up faster than I did. Okay. Now, days are calculated from sunset to sunset, not midnight to midnight. They mentioned Gethsemane here. We don't really... By the way, Gethsemane was an olive grove. And there was an olive press there. And so when you visit Jerusalem, they'll take you, they don't know if it's the same one, but they'll take you to an ancient olive grove near that location. You know exactly where it is. And they'll show you what an olive press looks like. That's where they were. That's what the Garden of Gethsemane is. And they have like 300-year-old olive trees there. They look pretty... They still have things coming out of them, but they look like they've had better years. But, now, they don't go back to the time of Christ, but just to give you the old look. But it's actually near the real location. You can see that. So, we're on Wednesday, Nisan 14, about BC 30. That's our best guess at it. Preparation Day. Now, what happens here with Jewish feasts? You have 3 feasts, 3 days in a row, because they represent 3 very important things that Jesus did. You have Passover on the 14th. You have the unleavened bread on the 15th, and you have first fruits on the 16th. Then 50 days later you have Pentecost, or Feast of Weeks after 7 sevens. By the way, when you do all 7 feasts of the Lord, they're done in 7 months. And the rest of the month there's no feast left, because of what they represent has to do with those numbers and those times. It's not done like, well, you need a vacation here and now you need another one here. It's not done that way. It's done to represent what Jesus did. He's the Passover lamb. He will die on the Passover. He will be in the grave just before the Passover is over. He'll Feast of Unleavened Bread. He will be in a tomb. On first fruits, he'll be raised from the dead. So we'll see how that works out. Then look at the scriptures here. Look at John. I've written it larger. John 19:31. This is where we get this from. This is what I want to mark. unleavened, the first day of, this is a 7-day feast or festival, unleavened bread. On the first day, it is a Sabbath. It is an